What's up guys, my name's Brandon and this is the new 13-inch M3 MacBook Air and this is the new 15-inch M3 MacBook Air. So in this video, we're going to unbox both of them and actually a third over here as well in a different color. We're going to compare the 13 and 15-inch sizes, compare the M3 performance, and just give my overall first impressions on whether or not I think these are worth buying. So let's start with the new Midnight 13-inch MacBook Air. So you can see on the box we do have the midnight color, which does show its shade of blue on the box, which is very realistic. Now this is the base model, which is an 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage, and it's the 13-inch. So this is the cheapest M3 MacBook Air you can get, and this will run $1099. And then the 15-inch, which also comes with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, is going to run you $1299. However, as you can see, I did get the upgraded version with 512 gigabytes of storage and 16 gigabytes of RAM. And this one costs $1699. So you're getting in MacBook Pro territory at that price range, but I do want to compare it and see if 16 gigs is really better than 8 gigabytes. And I got this one in the silver color. And then we also got Starlight as well, which again we'll unbox here in a moment. All right, so let's start with the 13-inch base model in the midnight color. So we do have the typical green arrows, the pull tabs right here on the box as usual. One on each side on the top and the bottom. So there we go. Let's flip it over. And let's see that midnight color for the very first time. So we do have the paper covering it up. Let's take a look at the accessories before diving in. So we do have the color matching cable here. So this is going to be similar to what we saw with the Space Black MacBook Pro, and it's going to be the same cord here that you saw with the M2 15-inch MacBook Air that came in this midnight color. And then we also have our paperwork here, which does come with some color matching midnight stickers, which I love to see the color coordination there. And then also in the box, we do have the 30-watt USB-C power adapter. Now the 15-inch you'll see comes with the 35-watt dual USB-C block, but this one only has the one port here. However, when you are speccing out the 13-inch MacBook Air, you can pay an extra $20 to get the 35-watt dual USB-C block, or if you upgrade to 512 gigabytes of storage, it comes with that by default. And also when you spec up the 13-inch to 512 gigabytes of storage or 16 gigs of RAM for the extra $200, you do also get the additional 2 GPU cores that comes standard on the 15-inch model. So you're going to have an 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU versus 8-core GPU on the base model. And you can also choose the 70-watt USB-C power adapter for free on the 15-inch or if you've spec'd up the 13-inch at all. All right, so let's set all this off to the side and let's take a look at the Midnight M3 MacBook Air 13-inch. So here is our look at that. Love the packaging as always. And here is what it looks like. You can see I do already have some minor smudging on here. So this is actually going to be less of a fingerprint magnet compared to the 15-inch M2 MacBook Air, which also came in the midnight color. And that's because of a new anodization seal that aims to reduce fingerprints, similar to what we saw with the Space Black M3 MacBook Pro from last year. However, this is going to show more fingerprints than the M3 MacBook Pro, which was in Space Black, because again, this does have more of a blue tint to it instead of being just straight black. And let's go ahead and open it up and see what we have here. So you can see the matching keyboard layout looks awesome. Let's go ahead and take off the screen. And yeah, I just love the midnight color. It actually goes really well on this compact 13-inch model as well. This will definitely be my preferred color. And you can see we have our hello screen right there. Always satisfying. All right, so we're going to set the 13-inch off to the side and go ahead and unbox the 15-inch model, which again, I did get in silver, and this is the upgraded version. So let's go ahead and unbox this. Very similar, of course, a much bigger box though than the 13-inch because we do have a much bigger unit. And I did get this in silver, which I feel like is just a classic color. You can really never go wrong with a silver MacBook in my opinion. So here we go. We do have the paper over top as well. We have our color coordinated cable right here. Inside of the pamphlet here, we will also have our color matching stickers. So here we go. Here are the silver Apple stickers that come with the silver color. And then once again, we do have a different block with the 15-inch model. This is going to be the 35-watt dual USB-C block, which I love these. These are great to travel with because you can charge 2 devices at the same time. And again, this comes standard with an upgraded 13-inch or the base model 15-inch. And man, just picking up the 15-inch, you're gonna feel a big difference in weight. I mean, after going from the 13-inch to the 15-inch, it's a pretty big difference. I mean, it's only 2.7 pounds versus 3.3 pounds, but it feels heavier. Like, it feels at least 2 pounds heavier to me after just holding the 13-inch. But let's go ahead and unbox this and take a look at that classic silver color. Here we go with the classic Apple logo on top. Man, these things are so thin. I'm used to a MacBook Pro, which has more, thickness. These MacBook Airs always impress me with how thin they are. So here we go. Here is our silver, and you can see a comparison of the keyboard right here between the Midnight and the silver. Midnight is just my favorite color, I think, for the MacBook Air. But again, you cannot go wrong with silver. And now we're gonna set the silver off to the side as well, because I did also get the Starlight 13-inch MacBook Air. So I've personally never had a Starlight MacBook, so I was curious, and I figured some of you guys might be curious as well as to how the Starlight looked compared to silver. So we're gonna go ahead and unbox this. This is the base model 13-inch as well. And here we go. You can see it looks very similar to the silver at first glance. And then in here, we do have the color matching braided cable, which does have a slight difference. It is more of like a tan tone to it. And let's take a look at those stickers as well, because I'm sure, yeah, these definitely have more of a kind of goldish tan tone to them as well. And we do have that same 30-watt adapter in there. And here is the Starlight. So man, even in this lighting, it looks silver to me. I guess when I turn it over, it's going to look a little bit different. Yeah, you can see it, but you really have to be in the right lighting. I mean, this thing looks very similar to silver. So let's pull these up side by side here. So I guess you could tell a difference when you put it next to silver, but if you were to see it without the silver comparison right here, you would think it's silver, but just with more of like a gold hue to it, like a gold tone, which I guess is why it's called Starlight. So it makes sense. But when you open it up, that's when you can really see the difference here. So it's hard to tell the difference from the shell, but when you take a look at the keyboard, that's where you can really, at least in person, tell a difference between these two. Even if I didn't have the silver here, you can tell this is not a silver color. And you can see the 3 colors side by side here: Midnight, Silver, and Starlight. Now, before we get into the setup process and running the benchmarks and all that fun stuff, I do want to take a quick look at the design on both models, more specifically the Midnight color here on this 13-inch model, because as somebody who has a 15-inch M2 MacBook Air, I can tell you right now that this is not smudging near as much as that machine did. I mean, that, the new anodization process that is on this M3 Midnight color it definitely shows. I mean, I can tell you right now, it does smudge up a little bit. You're always going to see slight smudging, especially if you put it in direct light. But I can tell you right now, it is much less of a fingerprint magnet than the M2 MacBook Air in the same color. And compared to the Space Black MacBook Pro, I would say it's about the same. I mean, you can see a little bit more of the smudging on the Midnight, like I mentioned earlier, because it is more of a blue tone versus a straight black tone that you have with the Space Black. But as far as the port selection goes, on the left-hand side, we do have our dual Thunderbolt 3 ports. So these are going to be USB 4 ports right here. And then we do have our MagSafe charger right there, which is nice to have. And then on the right-hand side, we have our 3.5mm headphone jack if you still use wired headphones. And then also both of these machines have Bluetooth 5.3 and Wi-Fi 6E support. So if you do have a Wi-Fi 6E router, or even if you just have a Wi-Fi 6 router in general, you will see better performance because of the upgraded Wi-Fi internally to support Wi-Fi 6E. And then we also have the same Magic Keyboard that we've had for a while now. So there's no touch bar and there's no wedge design anymore. So we don't have the kind of slanted, wedge design that we had on the MacBook Air previously, which personally, I liked that. I liked having, kind of a, place to rest your hands, and you kind of had that angle, but we do not have that anymore on the MacBook Air. Now you can see the difference between the 13-inch and the 15-inch in terms of the overall keyboard size. So you're only getting a 2-inch bigger display, but you can see you buy yourself a lot more space on the keyboard as well. So the trackpad itself is going to be much bigger than the 13-inch. You can see it's, maybe not double the size, but it's like 1.5x the size. And I'm going to put my fingers here just for reference. And then just looking around the keyboard, you can see up top here, there's a lot more space right here. Over on the sides, both sides, you have a lot more space. And then down here next to the trackpad as well, you have a lot more space, which is nice when you're kind of resting your palm right there, which I do a lot. You're not going to be, off the edge of the machine like you will on the 13 inch. So that's an advantage for the 15 inch, but again, it is going to be much heavier, 3.3 pounds versus 2.7 pounds. And if you're looking for comparisons, because I know it's hard to translate weight on video, the 13 inch is going to be the same weight as the previous generation MacBook Air, and it's also slightly lighter than the M1 MacBook Air from 2020. Now for the 15 inch model here, this is also going to be the same weight as the previous generation, the M2, but it is going to be slightly lighter than the M3 MacBook Pro from last year. And then taking a closer look at the displays, we do have liquid retina displays on both. So it's a 13.6 inch on the 13 inch and a 15.3 inch on the 15 inch. Both are going to have the same 500 nits of peak brightness. They're both going to have the same P3 wide color gamut, true tone, and of course, neither one of them are going to have the ProMotion display like you get on the MacBook Pro. And then we have a lot more to talk about, but I want to go ahead and set these up. So we're going to set up the 13 inch because it is in my favorite midnight color here. So let's go ahead and get through the setup process. So we're going to start from the very beginning. So here is the hello screen that you will see right when you boot up your M3 MacBook Air, and you do have to select your language at first. We're going to select English, and then from here we need to select our region. So I am in the US. We're going to select that. We have all of our accessibility features here. So vision, motor, hearing, and cognitive. I do not use accessibility, so we're going to do not now. Now we need to connect to our Wi-Fi network. You get some information about the data and privacy that's going to show up in the status bar. And now if you want to transfer anything over from a previous Mac or a Windows computer, you can now do that at this step, but I'm going to pass on this. We're going to select not now. And now you need to sign in with your Apple ID. And now we're going to set up our computer account. So you're going to put in your full name and your account name. I like having just my first name as the account name, and then you can set up your password right here, which I'll just set as password for now. And then you can also choose to allow to have your Apple ID reset the password, which I would recommend doing just in case. And let's go ahead and continue and set up our account. And now it's going to transfer over all of our iCloud data. So our notes, our calendars, our messages, photos, all of that is being transferred over right now after you sign in. And now you can choose to customize your settings if you would like to. I usually like to stick to the default that it has set up here. So I'm just going to click on continue, but you can customize that if you would like to. And then if you want to turn off the disk encryption, this is where you can do it. It is on by default, but you can go ahead and deselect that if you do not want to encrypt your data for whatever reason. You can do that there. We're going to continue. And now we need to set up Touch ID. So we do have the Touch ID button up in the top right hand corner. We're just going to scan our index finger. You can also scan whatever finger you feel comfortable with, whatever finger you're going to use the most to unlock your device. You can always set up more fingers and settings later. So we're going to continue. There we go. Our Touch ID is set up. And now you can add your cards if you want to. I'm going to skip this for now. And there we go. We are now on our M3 MacBook Air. So let's take a look at the version that we're running. So we are on Sonoma 14.3. So we should have a day one update here. So if you go into your system settings and go to general software updates, you should have a new update on day one. I'm not seeing it right now, but it should probably populate in the meantime because Sonoma 14.4 is the latest release. Okay, there it is. So there you go. It just popped up right there. So if you do get an M3 MacBook Air, just be prepared to update to the latest software on day one. Now let's pull over the 15 inch model again, because there are a couple of differences here that I want to talk about. So first off, we do have more space here on the trackpad of the 15 inch, and that's not just for space. You also can fit 2 additional speakers inside as well. So the 13 inch is going to have a 4 speaker sound system, whereas the 15 inch has a 6 speaker sound system with force canceling woofers. So you're going to get a lot more bass out of the 15 inch model and when it comes to the speakers compared to the 13 inch model. And both are going to have the same spatial audio support, which the M1 MacBook Air did not have. So the sound is going to be terrific on these. It was terrific on the M2 model as well. Now the mics are the same on both models. So the 13 inch and the 15 inch are going to have the same microphones, which is going to be a 3 mic array with directional beamforming. However, something new on the M3 model is going to be voice isolation and wide spectrum modes. So if we go into here, so we're going to go into QuickTime real quick on this model. And if we go to record audio with QuickTime and we drop down on our microphone here up in the menu bar, you can see that we now have voice isolation. So that was not there on previous MacBook Airs. Even the 15 inch M2 MacBook Air did not have the voice isolation feature for the mic mode, which is great if you want to record something on the go. And if you're in, like an airport or something where it's very loud, this is going to come in handy. Now, when it comes to the webcam, you can see we do have a FaceTime HD camera, which is now 1080p. So I say now, but the M1 MacBook Air still had a 720p camera. So Apple did switch that with the M2, and now on the M3, we also have a 1080p camera, and you can see what the quality looks like here. I am going to record myself. I'll back up a little bit so you can see this is what the quality and the audio sounds like, and I'm a good bit back, so I'm going to move closer here to the microphone so you can hear what it sounds like when recording from the front-facing camera here, the only camera on the M3 MacBook Air, and this is on the 13-inch model, so it's going to sit a little bit lower than what you would have on the 15-inch model. So if you're taller and you want to always stay in frame, you know, you may want to get the 15-inch for that reason. Now, even though the 15-inch is going to be larger and it has, you know, the extra speakers, we do not have any extra battery life. So both are going to be rated for up to 15 hours of web browsing and 18 hours of Apple TV movie playback, which is still the same as the M1 MacBook Air. So you're not going to get any gains in battery life whatsoever. Now, one of the big selling points of the M3 MacBook Air is something that really should have been here all along, but that is dual display support when in clamshell mode. So if you have your MacBook Air closed, if it's in clamshell mode, you can now connect up to 2 external monitors. So you can have a dual display setup with the MacBook Air. That is something that even the MacBook Pro at the moment does not have, but it will be getting in a future software updates. However, none of the MacBook Airs are going to get that in a software update. So if you do have a dual monitor setup, you might want to consider the M3 over something like the M1 or M2. Now, when it comes to the performance, which we are going to run some benchmarks here in a moment, Apple claims that the M3 MacBook Air is up to 60% faster than the M1 MacBook Air from a few years ago. And if you still have an Intel-based MacBook Air, Apple claims that the M3 is going to be up to 13 times faster. So a major improvement in performance if you're coming from a Intel MacBook Air. So that alone is pretty compelling, you know, as a proposition to upgrade or not. I would strongly consider it just based off of performance and battery life alone. But we'll talk about, you know, whether or not you should buy this after we run some of the benchmarks. So let's get downloading. All right, so I just downloaded all of the benchmarking tools and I went ahead and ran a few tests, and here are the results. Now keep in mind, this is the base 13-inch and the upgraded 15-inch. So this is going to be double the RAM and double the storage. So I want to see how those two compare. So you can see on the Cinebench test, we did score an 8415 on the multi-core for CPU on the 13-inch and an 8989 on the upgraded 15-inch model. So a decent size difference, but nothing honestly too crazy. Now I did also run a Geekbench test here, and you can see the Geekbench scores. So we scored a 3026 on the single core on the 13-inch over here and an 11414 on the multi-core. Now if we compare the 15-inch, it actually scored lower on the single core. So a 2954 and an 11403, so lower on both ends. Now, of course, that could be an anomaly. These benchmarks aren't everything, but I found that pretty interesting. Now, we do also have the disk speed test here. Now, I've not run this yet, so I am going to run this at the same time for both. We have the same 5 gigabytes of the stress level here, and let's see how these two compare on the read and write speed. So you can see the write speeds are significantly higher. So 1900 on the first pass versus 3100, and you can see how these are going about there. Now, the read speeds are pretty similar. I mean, look at that. That's 2800 versus 2600 megabytes a second. So really not a big difference at all in read speeds. You're going to notice the big changes in the write speeds, it looks like, if you are going to upgrade to the 16 gigs of RAM. Now that could be the storage, it could be the RAM. It's hard to say at this point, but you are going to get minor boosts, it looks like, when you upgrade the storage and the RAM. Now, is that worth the extra cost? I don't know. It depends on what you're actually going to be doing with the device, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Now, after running those benchmark tests and the disk speed test here, I've not really noticed any heat coming from either machine. Now, these are fanless devices, so you're not going to have a fan inside of either one of these. I am feeling more heat from the 13-inch model, especially up here closer to the display. I'm not really feeling it as much on the 15-inch, at least not as warm, but I'm actually kind of surprised at how well this is kind of dissipating the heat without having a fan to do so. All right, so after playing around with these machines for a little bit and after running the benchmark tests, I think I can give my first impressions now. So, you know, if you have an M1 series MacBook, specifically a MacBook Air, I would strongly consider upgrading to the M3 if you have a dual display setup, if you need faster Wi-Fi speeds, because again, we do have Wi-Fi 6E here, or if you just need a slight speed boost, like you are going to get better performance on the M3 compared compared to the M1. Now, if you have an M2 machine, specifically a MacBook Air, I would say probably don't upgrade. I mean, you probably know that by now, but do not upgrade to the M3 if you have an M2 MacBook Air, unless you need dual display setup. If you have a dual display setup, that would be the only reason I would say you should upgrade it to the M3, because you're not really going to see hardly any performance gain. Like in day-to-day usage, you're not going to really see any type of performance gains with the M3 over the M2, maybe unless you're gaming, because you do now have hardware accelerated ray tracing on the M3 compared to the M2, but overall you're not going to see much difference in day-to-day performance. Now, if you have an Intel MacBook Air, any type of Intel MacBook Air, I think it is absolutely a great time to upgrade. I mean, you have up to 13 times faster performance, you have better battery life, you have, better everything pretty much across the board. So if you have an Intel machine, I think it is definitely worth looking at the M3 MacBook Air. Even the base model, I think, is going to be just fine. And even if you have an Intel MacBook Pro, you're going to see nice gains from the MacBook Air, and you're going to have that dual display capability, without needing to go to the MacBook Pro. So that is also worth considering if you maybe don't do super intensive, video editing and gaming on a daily basis. A MacBook Air might suffice in terms of what you actually need. A lot of people buy more than what they actually need, which I think, is a reason that the MacBook Air sells so well, because you get great performance for a great price. And if you're trying to decide between the 13-inch and the 15-inch MacBook Air M3, I would say it really just comes down to preference and what you're actually going to be using the machine for. Like if you're using graphic design software like Photoshop, Illustrator, things like that, you're going to probably want the 15-inch because you want that extra real estate, but you are going to have the added weight. So if you're somebody who travels a lot and you don't do any type of graphic design work, the 13-inch is probably going to be perfect for you because it's going to be lighter in the hands, lighter in your backpack, and you may not benefit as much from the bigger display. I know for me personally, I am going to stick with the 15-inch only because I use Final Cut Pro, Photoshop, things like that. I need all that real estate, but if I didn't use those, I would absolutely go with the 13-inch just because it's so much more compact and light. And for the other small things like the speakers, like the 15-inch is going to have better speakers just because it is a bigger body, and it's also going to dissipate more of that heat. It's not going to be as hot, although neither one of them really get too hot in my experience. But small things like that, I don't really think they're going to be worth the extra money to go with the 15-inch just for better speakers. But if that is something you're into, that may be worth considering as well. But these two share a lot of similarities. Like both can do the dual display setup, both have the same battery life. Pretty much everything is the same except for, once again, the screen size and the weight are going to be the two big things that you need to decide between. And I think it really just comes down to what you're actually going to be using the machine for. Now, as far as the difference between 8 gigabytes and 16 gigabytes goes, I am going to make a dedicated video talking about 8 gigs for 16 gigs, but honestly, in my testing here, and after having, an 8 gigabyte machine for a while, my M2 MacBook Air is an 8 gigabyte of RAM machine. Honestly, I don't think it's worth it for most people to upgrade to 16 gigs of RAM. I really don't see many use cases where you actually need and will use 16 gigs of RAM on a MacBook Air. Because the people I think about when I think about a MacBook Air, the typical person I see buying this is somebody who does light creative work and just does a lot of web browsing and a lot of traveling. For those type of people, you don't need the power of 16 gigs of RAM. You don't need the power of a MacBook Pro. So 8 gigs is going to be enough, I think, for most people even considering a MacBook Air. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, 256 gigabytes of storage, in my opinion, that might be more worthy of an upgrade to go up to 512 than upgrading the RAM. If you had to choose one, because it is $200, each to upgrade the RAM and also for the storage, if you're going to spend an extra $200, I would probably recommend doing the storage. Now, I know you can connect an external drive and you can get a lot of storage, but still, 256 is such a small amount that you're going to run out of space very quickly on your machine. So in my opinion, after using the M2 MacBook Air, with the same 8 gigs of RAM, 256, I would say that the upgraded storage makes more sense than the upgraded RAM for the majority of people. But again, I will have a video coming talking more about the RAM and overall my experience after maybe a week of using these machines. But anyways, there you have it. That is the M3 MacBook Air in both the 13-inch and the 15-inch variants. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future MacBook Air videos. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.